Welcome to the deep dive. If you are tuning in today, that's December 17th, 2025, you are really catching a pivotal moment. International accountability is finally moving from just, a political promise to a very concrete legal mechanism. Just yesterday, the machinery designed to secure compensation for Ukraine officially came online in The Hague. But the immediate consequence of this move goes far, far beyond Eastern Europe. One of Russia's critical southern neighbors, Georgia, took a major high-stakes step by formally joining this accountability process. It's throwing its own sovereignty disputes right back into the global spotlight. So we are watching two huge forces collide here: the pursuit of financial justice for victims and a multi-billion euro geopolitical gamble that could reshape global finance. This is monumental. I'm Alex. Join me with Arya in the latest deep dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdowns of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going to cover the ultimate high-risk, high-reward bet Europe is making on compensation for Ukraine, a process that could net victims $140 billion, but at the potential cost of Europe's financial stability. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports.
That's exactly right. Yesterday, December 16th, marked the formal launch of the International Claims Commission for Ukraine, the ICCU, in The Hague. And we aren't just summarizing numbers here. We are dissecting the actual legal architecture, a system designed to quantify hundreds of billions in losses suffered by millions of people. Our mission today is to unpack the three pillars of this compensation system: the documentation, the legal vetting, and most critically, the immense financial gap.
And the centerpiece of that financial gap is the $140 billion question. Europe's explosive proposal to use frozen Russian central bank assets as a reparation loan. We really need to understand the unprecedented scope of claims being filed and, why financial law experts are sounding the alarm. They're saying that using these sovereign assets, even for a cause just as this one, risks inflicting catastrophic damage on Europe's own financial markets.
What's truly revolutionary here, I think, is that this independent mechanism is designed to ensure that ordinary people who have suffered damage caused by the war, can be compensated. It links individual loss directly to state accountability.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning then, the launch in The Hague.
Let's do it. So let's start with the diplomatic momentum. The conference saw 35 countries, plus the European Union, formally sign the convention establishing the International Claims Commission for Ukraine. And leaders were crystal clear. This is not simply foreign aid. They're framing it as a long-term security mechanism.
Right. This is the idea that peace can't truly endure without some form of accountability. Yeah. You had Moldovan President Maya Sandu stating it very plainly. She said, "Accountability is about creating the conditions for peace that endures. And therefore, accountability is a condition of security."
Exactly. The ICCU, that's pillar testic of the whole system. Its mandate is to assess damage, loss, or injury caused by Russia's internationally wrongful acts since February 24, 2022. And it builds on Pillar First, which has already been operating for some time now. The Register of Damage for Ukraine, or RD4U.
The Register. That was established back in May 2023 under the Council of Europe, and it's purely the documentation phase, right?
Yeah.
But the scale of that documentation is what just stops you in your tracks. It's already received somewhere between 80 and 86,000 claims.
It's a staggering number.
And 44 states and the EU have joined this register. That demonstrates a huge global commitment, not just to Ukraine, but to the principle of accountability itself.
And this is where the legal precedent gets really interesting, where the human suffering is truly captured. When we talk about war compensation historically, we often think of infrastructure, bridges, factories, buildings. And those categories are definitely in the RD4U.
But here's the aha moment for you, the listener. The scope goes so much deeper than just property damage. This new mechanism is meticulously aligned with international human rights law. We're seeing categories that address the profound personal cost of the conflict. Things like claims for personal integrity violations.
That category is just. It's critical. It includes claims for sexual violence, torture, serious personal injury, deprivation of liberty, and even forced labor. This is a deliberate, very modern approach designed to ensure victims of the most profound non-economic personal losses are actually recognized.
And it doesn't stop there. It covers family loss, so the death or disappearance of an immediate family member, and livelihood claims, loss of employment, the destruction of a small business. So the system is really designed to capture the economic collapse of communities right alongside the psychological and physical devastation of individuals.
So we have this massive volume of documented suffering in the register. That's pillar one. The ICCU, which is pillars the second, is basically the legal bottleneck. Its whole function is to rigorously review, assess, and verify the legitimacy of every single one of those 80,000 plus claims. Only after that can any compensation be finalized. This vetting is what gives the final awards their legal weight.
Well, it makes perfect sense. You need an ironclad legal foundation before you start asking states to fund hundreds of billions of euros in payouts. But for this vital work to even get started, the convention has this crucial dual condition for it to enter into force, doesn't it?
That's the pivot. That's what connects the diplomatic victory to the very imminent legislative challenge. First, the convention requires ratification by at least 25 signatory states.
25.
And second, and this is the big one, sufficient operational funds must be secured just to support its initial administrative work.
That's fascinating. So we have 35 signatures, but a signature is just the start of the process. Now, those 35 countries have to shepherd this convention through 35 individual, often very complex legislative processes in their own parliaments. That is not a fast process.
Not at all. And we're hearing these urgent calls, like the one from Estonia, urging swift ratification to get the commission rapidly up and running.
Yeah.
But the reality is legislative action across 25 different democracies is a massive undertaking, and time is really of the essence for the people waiting.
And that second condition, securing the initial operational funds, that feels like a microcosm of the gigantic financial hurdle facing Pillar the Third, which is the actual compensation fund. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, validating 80,000 claims is a cruel joke if there's no money there to pay them.
And that brings us to the financial wall.
Yes, exactly. The total damage runs into the hundreds of billions of euros. Pillar the Third, the compensation fund, is basically empty. Voluntary contributions, as generous as they're nowhere near sufficient to cover both reconstruction and this massive volume of personal claims.
And this disparity creates a profound political and, frankly, moral risk. You can't approve claims running into the hundreds of billions without a viable payout mechanism. It just turns hope into cynicism. It undermines the whole accountability effort, and that's why the focus has shifted almost entirely onto the estimated $185 billion of frozen Russian central bank cash balances.
And the overwhelming majority of that money is held by one single institution, Euroclear. For our listeners who aren't steeped in financial markets, can you just quickly explain why Euroclear is so central, why its failure would bring markets to a grinding halt?
Absolutely. Think of Euroclear as the massive central switchboard for nearly all trading in European securities. It's where the actual clearing and settlement of transactions happens. It handles trillions in assets every single day. If confidence in Euroclear collapses, trading across the EU capital markets essentially just stops. It is what they call a systemically important institution.
And the European Commission is proposing to use those Russian assets held at Euroclear through a mechanism they're calling the reparation loan. How does that actually work without violating international laws against, just confiscating sovereign assets?
Well, the Commission is trying to walk a very, very fine legal tightrope. They propose requiring Euroclear to lend $140 billion interest-free to the EU. The EU then loans an identical amount to Ukraine. The distinction is crucial. The EU isn't outright confiscating the money, which is legally very problematic because of state immunity.
Hang on, though. A lot of critical experts must see this simply as a politically convenient way to seize sovereign assets without actually calling it confiscation. I mean, is the loan structure just legal window dressing?
That's the core tension.
Yeah.
It's only justifiable if it is temporary and reversible. Think of it this way. The EU isn't stealing the car. They're taking out an enormous interest-free loan that's secured by the car. But they have to promise to hand the keys back instantly if the sanctions, the parking ticket, so to speak, expires.
And those sanctions need unanimous renewal every 6 months.
Exactly. So the legal commitment to Russia remains.
So Europe is essentially banking on perpetual sanctions, knowing that if those sanctions ever lapse, Euroclear has to be able to repay Russia on demand. And if Ukraine hasn't repaid the loan, which, let's be honest, the chances are statistically slim given the history of war reparations, then EU taxpayers are ultimately left footing that $140 billion-ish toll.
And that introduces two massive problems. First, the systemic risk. Requiring Euroclear to hold a Euro 140 billion loan creates enormous concentration risk for a systemically vital institution. And while member states are being urged to provide guarantees, those guarantees don't eliminate the risk if the market suddenly panics.
And the second, and perhaps more lasting damage, is the collateral damage to Europe's reputation and its markets. We are talking about a fundamental crisis of trust for foreign central banks and sovereign wealth funds that hold trillions in reserves in Europe.
Exactly. If foreign powers believe their legally protected reserves, held at Euroclear, can be redirected for European political policy objectives, their willingness to invest in European securities could just immediately erode. And this would cause incalculable damage to Europe's already struggling capital markets. It would completely undermine the EU's own long-term efforts to strengthen its financial footprint globally.
So the question becomes, why take on all these financial, reputational, and geopolitical risks, which Russia obviously views as highly provocative, when relying on joint borrowings might offer Ukraine predictable financing without jeopardizing the entire financial infrastructure of the continent? That is the trade-off Europe is grappling with right now.
And this brings us back to Georgia.
Right. Let's circle back to the high-stakes diplomacy we flagged at the top. Georgia's decision to be one of the 35 signatories to the Claims Commission Convention is just. It's deeply layered with geopolitical significance.
Georgia's signature is a powerful act of political principle. The Georgian foreign minister, Maka Bachorishvili, was very clear. She said Ukraine must have appropriate instruments to receive compensation, and that blatant violations of international norms must not go unanswered. And remember, Georgia was a founding member of the initial Register of Damage back in 2023.
And this isn't some abstract solidarity, is it? The foreign minister drew a direct connection to Georgia's own difficult experience. She talked about the high price paid by societies facing injustice. This is an explicit reference to their own ongoing struggle against Russia's occupation of two of its regions.
It absolutely is. It connects their past injustice to Ukraine's present one. They are using the ICCU not just to help Ukraine, but to reinforce a foundational principle of international law that is vital to their own long-standing conflict. That compensation is due for internationally wrongful acts.
But this is a high-stakes tightrope walk for Tbilisi, isn't it? Russia's foreign ministry recently praised Georgia's pragmatism for not joining anti-Russian sanctions and has been pushing hard for normalization. So is Tbilisi essentially using this ICCU signature to subtly but powerfully reaffirm its commitment to its European alignment, even while maintaining economic ties with Russia? That seems like a very calculated gamble.
It is entirely strategic. By officially joining a mechanism that explicitly targets Russia's internationally wrongful acts, Georgia ensures its voice remains part of the European legal order and it strengthens its ties with the EU. But at the same time, they're seeking a level of economic stability with their neighbor.
And the diplomatic messaging is so nuanced. While they pursue this pragmatism, their parliament speaker, Shava Papuashvili, he reiterated the non-negotiable condition for genuine normalization, which is that Russia must first recognize Georgia's territorial integrity.
Exactly. So signing the ICCU reinforces the very legal framework that Georgia believes will one day bring about justice for its own territorial integrity claims. It's an act of solidarity that serves a very pragmatic national interest.
So we have the full picture now. The launch of the Claims Commission cements this legal mechanism.
A mechanism that links Russian aggression to mandatory financial consequences for victims. It really is a victory for justice. However, the critical choice for Europe remains: balancing Ukraine's immediate need for hundreds of billions in funding against the long-term risk of compromising global financial stability.
And mobilizing that $140 billion through the reparation loan is the fastest solution, but it carries a colossal systemic risk to the confidence that underpins the entire European capital market infrastructure.
So the question for you to consider is whether the immediate need for funds justifies compromising the sacred notion of sovereign immunity, a pillar of international finance. Or would those frozen assets better serve the cause of justice as diplomatic leverage in future peace negotiations, ensuring Russia pays not just for the damage, but for the actual rebuilding effort without fracturing the global financial order in the process?
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry.
Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.